We are ready to begin this session of the conference this morning. My name is John Tunheim. I'm currently a United States District Court judge for the District of Minnesota at Chambers in Minneapolis. From 1994 through 1998, I was the chairman of the United States Assassination Records Review Board, the group that was responsible for declassifying all the remaining secret records of the Kennedy assassination. We have a distinguished group this morning. We are going to hear in a moment from Jim Fetzer, and I'm going to introduce the other panelists this morning as well before we begin. First, I'll introduce the others. John Williams, who is here down in the front row. We're all going to sit down so we can watch Professor Fetzer's presentation. John is a professor here at UND. He's about ready to retire. He has worked extensively on issues related to the Kennedy assassination, and he's going to. I think you're retiring next month, John. Is that right? After a long and very distinguished career, professor of educational foundations and research here at UND. Also with us as a panelist this morning is Gary Severson. Gary has been very active in Kennedy assassination research, particularly from his base in the Twin Cities. He is a native of Grand Forks and had the unique honor of having an ability to sneak in and watch President Kennedy's speech 45 years ago here on campus. But he's also a history teacher at Bloomington Kennedy High School, John F. Kennedy High School, and he knows a lot about the subject of the assassination. And the person we're going to hear from first this morning with a video presentation is James Fetzer. Jim is a recently retired professor of philosophy at University of Minnesota in Duluth. He, for about 15 years, I believe, has devoted an extensive amount of his time and energy and considerable research ability to examining the assassination of President Kennedy. He's written a number of books. He's focusing this morning on the photographic evidence, and particularly his work on the famed Zapruder film. So we're going to hear from Jim first, then we will reassemble up here in front and have some comments on his research, and we'll have some time for questions as well. So without any further delay, Jim, it's your deal.
Thanks very much, Judge Tunheim. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all. In 1992, I organized a research group, including the best qualified individuals to ever study the case. We found there was a superabundance of evidence, but that its authenticity was very much in doubt because often it was conflicting, inconsistent, didn't fit together. So our key task became sorting out the authentic from the inauthentic evidence. And what I'm going to do today is give you an overview here of what we have discovered, including in relation to the famous home movie of the assassination known as the Zapruder film, which is playing before your eyes at this moment. Those of you who were there last night heard Ted Sorensen observe in relation to the assassination that it was for him too painful a subject to even address, that while he knew there were conspiracy theories there, that he felt that the evidence they had to support them was not admissible in a court of law, and as an attorney he felt that that was a considerable drawback, and therefore he didn't focus on them. But he did acknowledge, interestingly, that he didn't know who was responsible for the death of JFK. And to that extent, at least, I considered him to be open-minded, where, in my judgment, what I will be offering here, by and large, resolves the questions with regard to admissible evidence and the nature of the events that took place. Killing JFK wasn't the problem. The challenge was to cover it up so that no one would have to pay a penalty for what took place. And the most important element in that cover-up was the Zapruder film, which we began to question seriously in 1996, when I organized the first symposium on Zapruder film authenticity at a national conference being held in Dallas that year. And we continued with our research such that after I review features we have found in the film that are telling signs that this is not an original film, but rather something that's been reconstructed using the sophisticated techniques of optical printing and special effects, that even to this day we are discovering new proofs of Zapruder film inauthenticity. Perhaps the best place to begin is by observing in relation to the film that we have the non-responsive bystanders. You'll notice at the very beginning there's a long string of bystanders there, and they don't seem to be reacting the way bystanders did throughout the rest of the route, where they were really cheering wildly. You observe them here in the foreground. These are the bystanders. This has raised questions as to whether this film, here you see they continue to be non-responsive, was a part of an authentic original. And indeed, what you can do with optical printing is take any foreground and combine it with any background, and with special effects you can introduce anything further you like. So that our inference is that footage, the foreground footage, was actually filmed when the pilot car went through. The pilot car preceded the limousine, or even the lead car. The pilot car was occupied by the chief of police, Jesse Curry, and very high-level Secret Service agents, Winston Lawson and Forrest Sorrells, for example, were in that vehicle. And it appears very consistent with what we have, especially when you compare with the rest of the motorcade and the reaction of all the spectators, that is what was going on there. Now, retired engineer by the name of Noel Twyman did a massive study of the case, especially of the individuals and groups who appear to have been involved. And notice that William Greer, the driver, does two head turns. He looks back at Jack and then he looks back forward in what appears to be with preternatural speed. So Noel hired a tennis player, professional athlete, to see how fast the head turn could be performed, and discovered that Greer, the driver of the car here, performs these head turns about twice as fast as is humanly possible, which might not sound like much, but it would turn a 4-minute mile into a 2-minute mile. In addition, you'll see in the background there's a woman in a red coat whose name is Jean Hill, with a friend by the name of Mary Mormon, on the grass just behind the limousine. Mary's taking photographs, some of which are extremely famous, one in particular. But Mary had said during an interview right after the assassination that she was standing in the street. Well, Jack White, a brilliant photo analyst, observed that in this most famous of her photographs, usually referred to as the Mormon, there are actually a couple of features of the concrete structures in the background that allow us to determine a line of sight to the focal plane of her camera. So that several of us went to Dealey Plaza with surveying equipment and determined, using that line of sight, where Mary had to be standing. And indeed, as she had observed, she had to be standing in the street. So that here we have another nice proof. Mary was, in fact, standing in the street, as her photograph, internal evidence of her photograph attests, but she's not shown in the street in the film. Now, something you may consider, well, I think all of us would consider to be even more striking, is that with regard to the headshot, you see there's a blood spray and a blob that emerges and goes toward the front. If I can stop the film at just the right point. Okay. There's a blood spray that emerges and the blob, but the blood spray dissipates very, very rapidly in less than a second. The film is going at 18.3 frames per second, and it's 5 or 6 frames or less, and it's all completely dissipated, which doesn't appear to be physically possible. And this blob emerges to the front, and as I'm going to explain, that might be consistent with a shot from the rear that might blow out the front of JFK's face and his brains toward the front, but in fact that's inconsistent with what we have discovered based on the X-ray evidence and the eyewitnesses. Just to give you an illustration, Jackie gave testimony to the Warren Commission, which it did not publish ostensibly on grounds of privacy, saying that from the front he looked just fine, but she was having this terrible time holding the back of his head together. Well, that he looked just fine from the front, of course, is very inconsistent with what we're seeing here in the film, And with the blob, and indeed a special effects expert from Hollywood who's even won an Academy Award by the name of Roderick Ryan, told Noel Twyman that both the blood spray and the blob had been painted in.